Well, hundreds of black federal civil servants say that they've faced discrimination on the job, and they want that and the ongoing mental trauma that it's caused to be addressed now. My next two guests are part of a class action lawsuit against the federal government demanding compensation, changes to the Employment Equity Act, and the establishment of a Black Equity Commission. And just last week, lawyers filed a motion asking for the immediate creation of a $100 million mental health fund to deal with related injuries. Nicholas Marcus Thompson is a union steward representing federal employees and is the lead plaintiff in the case. Michelle Herbert is an employee at Service Canada and one of the plaintiffs. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Great to have you here. Now, Nicholas, as a federal employee, why did you feel that a class action suit was the best recourse for you and other black workers?
Well, in short, public service is not safe for black workers. You know, we face microaggressions, macroaggressions, to never seen as good enough, or even having to work as 10 times as harder than white or other employees just to prove yourself, and constantly being denied those promotions. In Canada's public service, there is an economic knee on the necks of black workers.
Michelle, you hear that description from Nicholas. How much of that parallels your experience as a black civil servant?
It's 100% accurate. Many of us are on medical leave due to stress. We're talking about extreme levels of trauma. And I have to stress that anti-black racism and being subject to it day in, day out causes individuals to have panic attacks on a daily basis. We're talking about suicidal thoughts. We're talking about a growth of fibroids in individuals, physical and mental health. And the employee assistance program isn't adequate, is it not helping us to cope with this. Wow. So we are asking, and we are begging for the public support. I mean, we are here to serve you. We're here to serve you, and we do it with passion. We do it with love. We do it diligently. And yet, at the same time, we are being subject to trauma on a day-to-day basis for decades. And this is not even being addressed.
Tell me about your own experience as a civil servant. What types of systemic and other racism have you been dealing with?
I mean, being denied promotion after promotion, yet being asked to coach newly hired individuals, being asked to train individuals who are doing poorly on the job, always being used to help build my department. Yet when it comes to a promotion, for some reason, I'm not up to par. I mean, it's so clear and blatant, and it causes an erosion of my self-esteem. I mean, not just for myself, but for so many other people. We just feel like we're completely invisible, yet we're constantly being used. It's such a threat, as Nicholas mentioned, and it's not a safe environment for us to be working in.
Those impacts you talk about, you know, it affecting your self-esteem for one, but also even the physiological effects you mentioned. I would expect that those aren't limited to affecting your work. They affect your life outside of work as well.
Of course. It causes an erosion of our self-esteem, which plummets. That causes an erosion for your life in the worst way. And we're talking about long-term effects. We're talking about medical professionals who are not even prepared to help us with racialized trauma. I mean, and at sometimes you don't even know where to turn. You want to go to a counselor, they're not trained in racialized trauma. You go to your family doctor, they want to refer you to a specialist. I mean, you're suffering on a day-to-day basis, and then the support is not there. So that's what we're doing. We're asking the public, we're asking medical professionals to get involved and up your training. You can't just opt out of training for racialized trauma. You can't just pick and choose which part of society you want to serve. I mean, this is not adequate for us.
Just how did you feel about your job? I know you're on leave right now, but how do you feel about your job, the work that you do?
The work, I love the work I do. I love to serve people. I work in the employment insurance department. I've always loved the work I do. But it's not fair for me to be working in a toxic work environment. The work has never been an issue for me at all. It's never been an issue. But hearing racist jokes at team meetings and listening to management talk poorly about black staff, belittling us, that's not fair. We don't deserve that.
Nicholas, what did the data from the government show you about the career paths of black employees in the federal civil service?
Well, when we looked at the Public Service Commission's data on the public service, when we're talking about economics salary-wise, less than 1% of blacks in Canada's public service make $100,000 or more. The government is aware of the data and the numbers demonstrating that blacks are at the lowest levels of Canada's public service, and they've known that for quite some time.
The Employment Equity Act, though, already, it does speak to the hiring of visible minorities. Why isn't that enough?
Well, the Employment Equity Act has been consistently used by federal employers to discriminate against black workers. That is because the legislation does not define any categories in visible minorities. So there are several groups in the visible minorities categories, including blacks and other racialized folks, and federal employers consistently pick all other groups except black workers. And they do meet the definition of the Act. So that is why it's systemic discrimination, because the legislation is being used to discriminate against black workers. And that's why we're calling for a separate category for black workers to address the exclusion of black workers presently in hiring and promotions. So federal workplaces will now be required to hire and promote qualified black workers based on if there's any gap in the workplace. So the legislation it needs to be amended. There's a review underway. The government has launched a review, and we're hopeful that review and to have an opportunity to speak at that review, which we're calling for those changes to the Employment Equity Act. Other visible minorities groups are getting some opportunity. I should say that there is a glass ceiling at the bottom of the public service, and black workers cannot get past that glass ceiling. Visible minorities are able to get slightly above it. And the top of the public service is reserved exclusively for white folks.
Now, I know that, both of you have kind of given us descriptions that give us a sense of what the need is for mental health resources for people who have been through this. I do wonder, Michelle, though, as you describe what you have been through, and I can only assume that many people have stories like that, that many black civil servants have stories like that. How far will $100 million go as far as a mental health fund for black employees?
Well, go ahead, Nicholas.
Sorry, it is an interim measure. We are seeking additional funding every year after that, right? Until we're able to develop a robust program that will include community professionals, right? So we want to work with community experts, researchers, and service providers such as counselors, psychotherapists, social workers, psychologists, creating a program by us, for us, people with lived experience, and that experience in treating racial trauma. There's a lot of research. This is something that's still new. Not many mainstream health providers even acknowledge the term racial trauma. So there's a lot of research. A big part of what we're seeking in this funding is to conduct appropriate research to develop further training. And
so this $100 million is a start, is what you're saying here. There's a lot of work still to come. And I do wonder, and I ask you, Michelle, this lawsuit could go on for years. I wonder what the priority is here for you. Is it the end destination or is it the process?
Oh, no, 100% it's the process. And to let next generations know that there's a way to challenge anti-black racism on the job. We're winning every day.
Do you get a sense that they're learning that now?
Of course.
Yeah?
I can see it.
Where?
Children around me, even my own son and his friends talk about the lawsuit.
Really?
We're winning every day. And it causes them to think twice when they go on the job. What is appropriate, what isn't. It's actually teaching them how to learn about the Canada Labour Code, how to learn about the Employment Equity Act. It's teaching them to value themselves as workers. So we are winning constantly throughout this process. And this is a blueprint for so many other racially visible groups.
I was going to ask if also, not just other groups, but if you feel in other industries, this could affect them as well.
Private sector, exactly. Private sector. I mean, anti-Black racism is not just happening for federal government employees. It's happening across the nation. Our own Prime Minister has admitted it. It's in every institution you can find. Healthcare, education, private, public sector. It's everywhere.
Before I let you go here, Nicholas, have you heard?
That's why we need to have some mental health now, is because we know the legal process can be drawn out. And as Michelle pointed out, we have workers who are attempting suicide, workers who will continue to show up to work, serving Canadians every day, ensuring that child tax payment is processed, those GST returns are done, those income tax statements, the EI that workers receive. We have workers showing up, delivering those services, injured every day. So we cannot afford for a legal process, especially to be drawn out, while Black workers are facing injuries and significant injuries and trauma on a day-to-day basis.
I really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you
for
very
having
much.
us.
Nicholas Marcus Thompson is a union steward representing federal employees, and Michelle Herbert is an employee at Service Canada. They are both plaintiffs in the Black Civil Action class action suit against the federal government, alleging systemic racism against Black employees. 7:20.